So let's take a minute of silence, please.
Del Centro Democrático.
Okay, thank you very much for that moment. Now I'm pleased to formally welcome you to the workshop of training in knowledge transfer in higher academic institutions. The purpose of the following activity is to achieve a direct relationship between the specialist from Fulbright and the dynamic of the Uniagustiniana as a member of Rumbo. This interaction will allow the specialist to provide recommendations and advices according to Uniagustiniana's reality. Let's get to know a little bit more about our Fulbright specialist guest. Dr. Tasha Hube has a postdoctoral degree from Vanderbilt University on developmental psychopathology, doctor in developmental psychology by the University of California, Riverside. She has a master's degree in developmental psychology by the University of California in Santa Barbara. She has a degree in psychology by the University of California, Santa Barbara. She also is actually working as an assistant associate full professor chair at the Humboldt State University. Dr. Tasha Hube has received more than 6 important recognitions, such as the one she received in 2010, in which she was awarded for the excellence in infusing diversity into teaching. She has more than 25 years of experience in education and social researchers. Now, we have a brief outline of the main topics that our Fulbright specialists, Dr. Tasha Hube, will go over on this event. First, she will start talking about the historic and current trends in knowledge transfer and community engagement. Then Dr. Hube will present us some recommendations for best practices, and she will show us examples from her own experience. Then we will open up the panel for discussions. Remember that you could formulate your questions and comments in English or Spanish. At this moment, I would like to give the opportunity to Dr. Julio León, our Vice President, Research and Innovation at Uniagustiniana. Julio.
Buenos días, ¿me escuchan?
Yes.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Dr. Howe, it's a pleasure to have you with us. We do the Agustiniana. I had the opportunity to be in the last meeting with you, which was very helpful for me. And as I said at that time, we are a very young university, which is at the middle of the discussions about these two concepts, knowledge transfer and social value. So this is...
Ya le aviso.
new for us, but
Ya le aviso, dame un segundo.
workshop would be very helpful for our researchers in order to understand what they mean and in order to implement some new policies about that. I would like to know if I can speak from now in Spanish.
Yes, that's okay. You can do.
And who is going to be translating for us?
Okay. Buenos días a todos. Good morning, everyone. Nosotros tenemos a Claudia y Tasha sabe cómo activar la traducción simultánea para que pueda escuchar el audio en inglés cuando se habla en español. So Tasha, what we were saying here is that now they're going to be speaking in Spanish. So please, you know how to activate your translation so then you get the audio in English. So you can help us with this. Thank you.
Okay, so we have today some researchers and some people from the staff of Uniagustiniana, and I would like to provide a short context about our institution. So I'm going to do it from now in Spanish and slowly in order to facilitate translation. Okay, Uniagustiniana es una institución muy joven, tiene solamente 12 años de existencia, es privada, de origen católico y cuenta con alrededor de 15, 16 programas académicos de pregrado. Tenemos programas de posgrado, de nivel especialización, pero no contamos con maestrías ni con doctorados. Por ley, estamos obligados a desarrollar investigaciones, principalmente a cargo de nuestros profesores, pero no tenemos tanta exigencia de que nuestros estudiantes participen de las investigaciones de los profesores, aunque esto es preferible. En cuanto a los estudiantes y a nuestros programas, la expectativa es que el acercamiento a la investigación sea un poco más formativo, más trabajo en los cursos, trabajo en aula, orientado a que conozcan un poco de investigación, aprendan y desarrollen algunas habilidades para esto, pero no necesariamente que se preparen para continuar participando de procesos investigativos en un posgrado, en una maestría o en un doctorado, porque nuestra orientación es un poco más profesionalizante, tanto en los pregrados como en los programas de posgrados, en las especializaciones con las cuales contamos. Hay 4 facultades. La primera es la Facultad de Ciencias Económicas y Administrativas. La segunda, la Facultad de Ingenierías. La tercera facultad se denomina Arte, Comunicación y Cultura. Y la cuarta es la Facultad de Humanidades, Ciencias Sociales y Educación. En estas 4 facultades están repartidos todos nuestros programas. La Vicerrectoría de Investigaciones, que es la dependencia a cargo de fomentar la investigación en la institución, existe hace 5 años. En este tiempo hemos desarrollado un proceso positivo, interesante, que tiene cosas por mejorar, pero que nos ha permitido en algunas mediciones, tanto internas como externas, especialmente las externas desarrolladas por nuestro Ministerio Nacional de Ciencia, Tecnología e Innovación, son muy importantes para nosotros. Han indicado que nuestro crecimiento en algunos indicadores de corte más cuantitativo y muy básicos ha sido bastante positivo. Me refiero a indicadores como cantidad de investigadores reconocidos dentro de nuestro Sistema Nacional de Ciencia, Tecnología e Innovación, cantidad de grupos de investigación reconocidos también en el sistema, publicaciones, hago referencia aquí a artículos, libros, capítulos en libros de investigación, y otro tipo de actividades investigativas. En relación a nuestro tamaño, somos una institución pequeña y a nuestros recursos, que son limitados, hemos tenido un crecimiento positivo e importante, pero vamos a entrar en una etapa en la que queremos madurar un poco más y por lo tanto estamos discutiendo en función de nuestra naturaleza católica, humanista y muy preocupada por temas sociales, discutir sobre transferencia de conocimiento y valor social. Esperamos que en una nueva etapa del desarrollo investigativo institucional podamos hablar no solo de indicadores y métricas cuantitativas tradicionales asociadas a proyectos de investigación y a sus resultados, sino que también podamos ir un poco más allá y dar cuenta de los aportes que estamos haciendo a la sociedad desde otros indicadores y tal vez con elementos un poco más cuantitativos que respondan a lo que realmente se esperaría de investigaciones que estén causando impacto y que resuelvan problemáticas concretas de comunidades. Entendemos que necesitamos primero definir un poco cuáles son esas comunidades a las cuales queremos aportar, poder relacionarnos, establecer relaciones de confianza con estas comunidades, poder identificar problemáticas de interés tanto para las comunidades como para nosotros, formular propuestas, permitir que tengan su proceso de maduración natural y al finalizar monitorear y dar cuenta de los resultados que se han obtenido. Y también hemos pensado que esta valoración de la transferencia de conocimiento y del valor social debe estar asociado a dos componentes. Uno, interno, institucional, que se construya junto con los investigadores y que obedezca a las intenciones propias de nuestra institución, y otro, un poco más externo, estándar, seguramente de carácter internacional, que nos permita compararnos con otras instituciones y ver de qué manera nos está funcionando nuestra propuesta de investigación con impacto social. Con esto cierro el contexto rápido sobre nuestra institución. Si se requiere un poco más de información para comprender lo que somos y en qué etapa de maduración nos encontramos, estaré atento a responderlo, a ampliar lo que acabo de mencionar. Y bueno, daría paso a Tasha y a las personas que nos ayudan a coordinar hoy el evento para que empecemos en la dinámica de interacción con los asistentes.
Rumbo or others, do you want to say anything before I start?
Thank you, Tasha. Sure, I just want to welcome everyone to this event. We have been holding these events for 3 weeks. We started last week. This is the second week. We are holding different events with all the universities we have, with our specialists from Fulbright, Tasha Howe. And today we are gonna talk about and today's conference or workshop, more than a conference, is I'm gonna say it in Spanish: transferencia de conocimiento como valor social en las instituciones de educación superior. Gracias a todos por conectarse y los dejo con nuestra invitada Tasha Howe. Okay, Tasha, your turn.
Muchas gracias. Bienvenidos a todos. I would like to start addressing a... Oh, I have to change my language now. I'm hearing Spanish. I wanted to start by addressing a few things that Julio Cesar said about his institution. I think everyone needs to mute their microphone. I'm hearing background noise. One of the things that the host muted me. One of the things that I liked about his comments were going back to the meaning of Catholicism. When you think about the literal translation of Catholic, it means all embracing. It means universal humanity. And so in that way, by having the Catholic Foundation really means that you can work across communities. You don't have to only work with Catholic people, but it's a humanistic approach to research. And at the end of my presentation, I will show you some of the things our university has done. We are not a religious school, but we have the similar values of humanism. The other thing that is important to know is that only about 25% of students ever go beyond the bachelor's degree. So most of us are teaching students who are not going to master's, they are not going to a PhD. Nevertheless, research can be extremely formative for whatever career they may enter. And so I have trained hundreds of undergraduate students helping with research. In fact, I have 4 undergraduate students on a paper with me right now getting a publication who helped with my latest research project, because the research builds the skills that they need to survive and thrive in any career. So if you think about things like critical thinking, problem solving, interpersonal group dynamics, working well with others, being able to work independently, all of the skills that every single job requires come out of doing research. And so research is very important for skill building, even if you never go beyond the bachelor's degree. The other aspect that makes it very important, even for an undergraduate institution, is that it gives students hands-on experience where they are actively constructing knowledge closely with a professor. So there are very few other activities that allow students to get to know professors at this intimate level to really get the active mentoring beyond the classroom. So research is one of the best ways to get to know students, to write them letters of recommendation for careers or grad school or internships or whatever. So it really is a great opportunity for students and faculty alike. I could not be where I am today without the hundreds of undergraduate students who have been in my lab. So I encourage everyone to go on with the research, even if it's only an undergrad institution. So those were a couple of points that I wanted to make before I get started. Does Julio Cesar have any reply to that or want to say anything to that?
No, I completely agree. Something that we need to improve. Being a young university is not required for us by law, but we know that it's really important for students and for us, as a higher education institution. So we hope to improve on this matter pretty soon. And what we are doing now, these discussions about knowledge transfer and social value, are in the middle of some other discussions about how to improve our whole model. So this is something in which we really need to work.
Okay, great. So I'm going to share my screen now. Can you see this? Thumbs up?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. So I'm going to be talking about town gown connections. This is a phrase that we use in the United States. The town, of course, is the community, and the gown, of course, is the graduation gown or the regalia that we wear at the university. And as I was just pointing out, a few of the benefits for the students and for the faculty, it really does benefit all. It benefits communities when done correctly and not done in an exploitative manner. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the history of this situation, which is interesting at a Catholic university to talk about this history, because historically universities were developed by religious orders. So all of the original universities were of a religious nature, and they really felt that the local community was morally corrupt. And so they were going to do something about this problem. So most campuses were built on the top of mountains or in very beautiful, rural or isolated areas. The other Fulbright scholar and I, who's here right now, we're talking about how most campuses are in the US are in these beautiful settings, isolated from the community so that parents feel safe sending their kids to live there. But I see that in Colombia, at least in Bogota, a lot of the universities are right in the middle of the city. So these are some different contexts that might be affecting the different connections to the community. So originally, these universities provided the students housing and food and everything they would need to protect them from the sinful community. In the USA, when we started expanding westward in 1862, there was a program developed called the Federal Land Grant University. And so this federal land grant program gave 30,000 acres of land to every state in the country to develop a university. But if you were going to develop a university, you had to provide services to the public. And so most universities did this, but in a pretty non-helpful way a lot of times. And most universities saw this service to the public as a burden. It's just something we're doing to get the money from the government. And today, many still feel this way. They still feel like we are the holders of all the knowledge. We are educated, we are some way superior than the people in the community, and we kind of look down on people in the community. So that's still going on today. So today in the United States, 90% of the universities have an office of community engagement. So at least we're putting some sign out there that we care about the community, but only 1/3 of those actually have people from the community working in the office. So it's mostly the academics and the staff members, the administrators who are working in those offices. And the other problem is that they are typically underfunded. So anything having to do with community engagement is running on a shoestring budget. And so this leads to high staff turnover. So people are coming and going. There's no consistency. So people start projects with the community, and then 2 years later, it's all different people and the program just dies. So these are some things to be aware of that could happen to you. Many universities, as I mentioned, still have a colonialist mindset. So they're sending students out into the community to volunteer or do research or be an intern somewhere to help those people. So this colonialist mindset is a barrier to actual success. And so students develop a mindset, again, that they are superior to people in the community, that they are more intelligent, they have more knowledge, and professors are designing research projects in their own mind that they want to do in the community, but they're not actually having anyone from the community participate. So this is typically how the projects go. The university does things to the community. We're going to deliver this program, or we're going to help them with this. We're going to help them manage this. Sometimes they ask the community for approval of their project, and some people from the community will say, okay, maybe change a few things, and then they continue with the project. So this is how a lot of projects go. And I would suggest that this is not the best way to engage the community in meaningful transformations that they believe in. So the better conceptualization of a project starts with a lot of questions on the part of the researcher. What would success look like? If my plan worked out, how would that look in the community? And could I measure those outcomes? Who will the informants be? Will it be people in the community? Will it be government statistics? Will it be me as a researcher? Who's going to tell us whether it's been successful? What type of data will we collect? What are our short-term goals as soon as the project ends? But are there longer-term goals for continuing engagement or refinement of the project? And what if our outcomes are not as planned? Because a lot of times we have plans for communities and it doesn't really work out, probably because we didn't consult with the community ahead of time. So this is a model that shows the key elements of successful project planning. As you can see, number one is that you consult the stakeholders' needs. So you have to do a needs assessment first. What do they need? What are they hoping to get done? What can they contribute? What ideas do they have? What are their views of the university? Do they trust the university? Do they feel that they're being exploited? How can they work together as a true member of the team that's helping to determine the project objectives, which is step number 2. So you really cannot create the project objectives until you've made a team, a coalition with the people in the community. And then it's the pretty typical process of creating a program. You know, when are the due dates, the schedule, who's doing what, what's the budget, and so forth. But really the number one thing is to involve them in a real way, not in a patronizing way or a colonialist way. So that means they are an integral part of the process throughout the entire program. So I have a few ideas here for starting to engage the community. And this can be the community that's surrounding your university, but it can also be more far away communities. If you have partnerships with those communities, it's great to provide scholarships for students from that community. For example, I work with, we have 13 Native American indigenous tribes in our. So when we have scholarships, I make sure that at least one of the scholarships goes to the Native American high school, to the top student in the Native American high school. And so that is a great way to start getting members from the community to have a real connection to the university as insiders instead of as outsiders. Inviting the community to your cultural events, your art exhibits, concerts, any kind of athletic events or lectures or things like that. Opening your campus, and this can actually be a moneymaker as well. Opening your campus, especially when there's no classes going on, like in the summer or over the winter, having conferences or training sessions for people in the community I do a lot of training for kindergarten through 12th grade teachers. And so they don't work in the summer and we don't work in the summer. So the campus is open, it's pretty empty. And so we bring the teachers to campus and give them some professional development, you know, issues like diversity, equity, and inclusion, or we teach them about latest theories, research, and so forth. And we also make community engagement a key part of our professors' promotion criteria. In the United States, we have a tenure system, TENURE, and this tenure system is 6 years of preliminary probationary time. And then after 6 years, you get evaluated for tenure. If you do not get tenure, you must.
Les agradecemos mantener el micrófono cerrado durante la intervención. Sorry about it, Tasha.
I'm hearing people. Should I continue?
Yes, please.
Okay. And so if you do not get tenure, you have to leave the job. I know you don't have the tenure system, but you do have a promotion and retention system. And so we have written into our criteria that you get more credit, like more points towards your tenure if you are involved in the community. And so we count this for community service as well as research. So the best way to get this in your tenure file is that your teaching, your research, and your service are all combined together into the same projects. So I work in violence prevention. I teach classes on family violence. I provide service to local agencies in consulting and training. And my research is also in that area. So one project can be part of teaching, service, and your research portfolio. There should be some internal funding for those who collaborate with community agencies. We have small amounts like $5,000 that we can give to that purpose. And then providing curriculum about community-based research. And so in all of my classes, I have sections on doing this community-based research. I teach about the basics of it and tell students about the best practices. And when I'm teaching about that, I have people from communities surrounding us come and give guest lectures. For example, I teach a lot about LGBT issues and LGBT rights in my classes. And so I have people come in who are maybe in a gay triad or people who are in a polyamorous relationship. And so people who are not usually visible in classrooms, I have these guest speakers come and just tell about their lives. And that really helps students see how the research is tied to real people. Some other ideas for engagement is to provide technical assistance to local businesses. Like our business students go and help small businesses create business plans and business evaluations. And our accounting students help low-income people file their taxes. Providing leadership training to youth groups. We invite 8th graders who are like 13 to 14 years old to campus to visit our classes, to learn about going to college, and we do special little activities with them. Partnering with community groups on grant applications. More and more funding agencies want to see interdisciplinary work. They want to see you working across sectors with multiple stakeholders. Providing resources for public safety. So maybe you're providing barriers for streets or some fences or some security guards so that people in the local community feel you're contributing to their welfare. inviting the community to use your gym, your computers, your library, those sorts of things. So we have certain hours in our swimming pool that's open to the community. We provide swim lessons to children in the community. People in the community can use our library and so forth. So I've been interested to read research that actually asks community members what they think of universities. Unfortunately, the views are pretty negative. Communities feel that they are exploited. They feel that people at the university are these rich, educated people who don't care about the real world. The views are usually not that positive, even though we think we're doing a great job. So in this study, they asked community members, what do you want from us? What do you want? So that would be a great research study to start out. If your university is new to this field, ask people in the community, what do they want from you? What would help them? What would help create a positive attitude about the university? The #1 request from the community was to invite us to your events. Invite us to things that you're doing on campus. I remember my first job was in Kentucky at a private school that was pretty much all white people, but the surrounding community was all African-American people. So I started saying, why don't we invite them to our plays? Why don't we provide 50 free tickets? Why don't we invite them to our soccer games? Invite them to lectures, create a scholarship so they feel connected to us. And so that was the #1 request in this study, was to invite us to your functions. The #3 request, #2 was parking, by the way. Stop parking in our neighborhoods. You're taking up all the parking. #3 was working together on mutually beneficial projects. And they followed up 6 months later, and after they had started listening to the community, and they found that the community members who attended campus events had more favorable impressions of the university. So they trusted the university. They did not feel the university was there to exploit them or use them. And they felt that the university was an asset to the community. In my area, it's kind of not even up for debate that our university is an asset to the community, because we're the only university for 5 hours in any direction. So we're the biggest employer, and it's kind of clear that we're an asset to the university, but people still have negative attitudes about us. And so asking if they view the university as an asset is an important question. They also felt the university wanted to invest in improving the larger society. So these are some interesting ways that you can start your journey by just asking the community, inviting them, talking to them. So the United Nations has developed the Sustainable Development Goals, and that's another place you can start thinking about which of these sustainable development goals could my project accomplish. So there's things about, safe water, climate change, peace, justice, poverty, health, well-being. There's a lot of areas that your research project might help, which could help Columbia strengthen its meeting of the Sustainable Development Goals. Those orange arrows are where my research fits in. So how can this be done? How can we start doing this if we're not already doing it? Or maybe how can we improve doing it? So participatory action research is a great system that changes the colonialist mindset to the community. So you're learning by doing things. You're collaborating to change systems. So participatory rural appraisal is a great 5-step process to think about. The first step is empowerment. So knowledge is shared and owned by the locals. It's not us here at the top in the ivory tower, looking down on what we can do to them, but they are co-constructing the knowledge with us. Respecting community members. Don't go into the community thinking I'm the expert on everything. I know what you need. Maybe you have no idea what they need. So listening more than you talk. Having a little cultural humility. Using their resources to help them. Maybe they make a local product, or maybe they have some water resources or something that they would like to generate income from. And so if you can use any of the resources they develop in the project, that would be helpful. Enjoyment. I think this is underrated. It's really fun to work with communities. You learn so much, you create authentic relationships. I mean, you go in the beginning being a little bit scared because you're not familiar with that community, but it turns out to be the greatest experience of your life. And if done correctly, they also enjoy it and really like their relationship with you. It's important to be inclusive. So say you get one community elder or one respected leader to participate in your project. Don't assume that that person or that group represents the entire community. You have to hear diverse voices. Some may still be opposed to your project. Include women's voices, especially if it's a patriarchal culture. Talk to the children, talk to different groups within that community so that you get an idea for the diversity within that community. So this participatory action research is what I talk about in my classes. As I mentioned to students, I use it in my research, and then I use my expertise wherever it can be used. If people want to invite me for training or consulting, then I also use it for my service. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my research so you can see how this looks. So my research is on child abuse prevention, and it starts with the basic science of this huge study that was over 20 years ago, examining how common are these adverse childhood experiences, also known as ACEs. How common are these? And so this huge study of 17,000 middle-class people in the general community came to get their annual medical checkup, and along with their medical questions, they started asking people about their childhood history of physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. Different things, maybe their parents had been on drugs or mentally ill, or maybe there was domestic violence. So they asked people about these 10 common ACEs. And they were surprised to find that they were extremely common. About 60% of people had at least one of these. And depending on now, after all these years of research, we see probably about 60% of every community has at least one of these, and about 20 to 30% of most communities have 4 or more. And when you have 4 or more ACEs, you really start to see the impact on physical and mental health. So when people have 4 or more ACEs, they start to develop in an exponential linear manner higher rates of the leading causes of death, such as heart disease, depression, cancer, cardiopulmonary disease, obesity. They found in this original study leading up to this, they found that the majority of obese women had been sexually abused in childhood. So this really changed the world when we started seeing how closely intertwined childhood trauma was with physical health later in life. Today, we have an expanded view of ACEs. So today we know that it's not only those 10 ACEs that people are experiencing, but there's discrimination, racism. If you think about poor housing quality, lack of clean water, And then I have over on the left there, some traumas that we've all experienced around the world. All of us are sharing in the trauma of COVID. Many of our countries have racial and political violence, protests, riots, and most of us around the world also have economic downturns. So this expanded view of ACEs shows that it's even more common than we think, and that so many of us are affected both physiologically and psychologically by trauma. And I think I have that on my schedule for later in the week. I have so many lectures. I can't remember what day is what topic, but I know later in the week I'm doing a whole thing on trauma and resilience and dealing with stress. All right. So knowing how common this is, going back to the things I was talking to Julio Cesar about in the beginning is, what are the skills we want students to develop as they go out into the world? So the skills that research teaches them and the skills that we want all students to have when they graduate are skills that take place in the frontal cortex, in the front logic center of the brain. So we want students to be able to be very organized. We want them to control their emotions, to use critical thinking. We want them to be able to self-monitor, to plan, to organize. So all of these things take practice, and research is a great way to practice these skills, but it's very difficult to develop these skills when you have high rates of trauma or ACEs. So you can see in this little cycle that we come into the world with our genes. We all have a genetic profile. Some of us have inherited genes from multi-generations of stress and trauma. And especially I'm thinking of indigenous people or people who have a history of racism or genocide. When we don't correct for those wrongs, we pass the health impacts of that trauma into the next generation in their genes. So we may have people who already come into the world predisposed to mental and physical health problems. Then depending on the environment they're raised in, their brain will start developing around these experiences. If it's a lot of ACEs, or it's not a lot of ACEs, it's like a healthy, loving environment, your brain will organize itself around those experiences. And if we had experienced ACEs, we need corrective experiences in order to not pass that trauma into the next generation. So this is what I do research on. And those corrective experiences include being a mentor, finding people who love you and support you, finding mindfulness or religious practices that help you to control your emotions and process your trauma. There's a lot of different ways that we can provide corrective experiences for trauma. So this is basically what my past 25 years of research have revolved around, the corrective experiences of parent-child relationships. So how do I fund this? I've had to be very creative because I, like you, work in a field that has no money. Usually when you're working with children, nobody wants to fund it because children don't vote. They have no. So how do I fund this? You have to be creative. So the methods of collaborative funding, I have funding in quotes because funding doesn't always mean money. So I've been able to do 20 years of research with very little money because I've been creative. And it starts with building coalitions, building collaborations. So I have here listed all the types of agencies that I have collaborated with. And so this involves going to a lot of meetings. Early in my career, I just went to meetings of everybody who had anything to do with children or violence. And I just got to know people and I got to know what's important to them. What are they working on? Can we collaborate? Can I help you? And one of the groups you might be interested in is at the bottom, faith-based groups. I've worked with a lot of churches, even though nothing I do is of a religious nature. I remember in Greece, I did a presentation about child abuse prevention to 100 Greek Orthodox priests. It was very interesting. They wanted to know, what can priests do when they encounter family violence, when they see children being abused? They wanted to know about the science. So I think we underutilize religious groups, especially religious groups who have been found out to be corrupt or to be committing crimes. I think they're looking for opportunities to show that many of them actually really do care about the community and really do want to be involved with universities on projects. So these are some groups that you could consider partnering with. You have to engage in cultural diplomacy when you're in these coalitions. So when you get to come to people's meetings and you get to know people, examine the funding history. Who funds them? What are their priorities? What have they been doing? And can you do something to help them with their projects? Is there some expertise that you have that might help their organization? And so you look for overlapping goals. And so this is what I've done working with Indigenous groups, is I have looked at what's important to them, and not surprisingly, childhood trauma is very important to them because they have suffered generations of oppression and even genocide. So they really want to break the cycle of childhood trauma. So I've been able to make amazing relationships with local Indigenous tribes, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. The other thing that I've done is seeking small business donations for my projects. So I will talk to people who can provide school supplies or printing services or even food. The churches have supplied a lot of dinners, transportation for parents. So you kind of have to be creative about what exactly does your project need. It might not actually need money. It might need other things that you can partner with businesses to provide. So when businesses donate things like movie tickets or pizzas or whatever, I make a certificate that says, I am doing my part to prevent child abuse in my community. And then these businesses put that on their wall, and they feel very proud when people come and ask them, oh, you're working on helping abused children. That's great. And then they start conversations. So people develop a positive view of these businesses who are also doing something to support the community. As I mentioned earlier, if you work across sectors and across disciplines, you're more likely to get funding because government funding in particular is very scarce. And so the more agencies are involved, the more likely they are to believe in the project. You also want to use students. So this again is a great way that professors can benefit from student labor. I use students for everything, and we provide course credit for them. So we have courses in fieldwork, in research, in independent study. So students can get units towards graduation by participating in our projects. Of course, we make them, write papers or do data analysis or something. So there is a class component to it, but it's mostly doing the hands-on research projects. And students love this. It's such great experience for them. They love having such close interactions with the real world and not just in the classroom. Students get to present at conferences, they get to publish with professors, they get letters of recommendation. So they love doing it, even if they don't get paid, but they do get class credit. I mean, you have to give them something. And I usually give them food. So I usually have like a monthly lunch for them. The other thing that I mentioned earlier is to respect the citizen input and use that input when you're requesting funding. So if the local community is saying, we want this, this is great, then that's very helpful. And also to be transparent. So your partners need to know that you are never going to be corrupt in any way, and the funding use is going to be very transparent. So why should I do this? You may be asking. It sounds like a lot of work. It is a lot of work. Community-based research is harder than any other kind of research. I mean, if I were just sitting in a lab with rats or with chemical compounds, it would be a lot easier than what I do, but it just wouldn't be as fun. It's just like, it's so challenging and so difficult, but so rewarding. So why should I do community-based research? For one, we live in a globalized knowledge-based society now. And so this requires that everyone has some level of education, even if it's not formal education. People have to be involved with the development of knowledge. Working together will maximize human capital. So people in the communities we're working with will benefit, and that will lead to beneficial economic growth for everyone. Once we elevate the quality of life for everyone in our community, the whole society starts to benefit and become elevated as well. As we mentioned earlier with our humanistic values, everyone has the right to be heard and the right to decide what happens to them. And so it's not just those of us who have money and privilege and formal education. We shouldn't be the ones who decide everything. I liked this quote from a professor at the University of Central Florida Center for Community Partnerships. He said, "The linkage between universities that create knowledge and communities that develop it and create incubators to find markets for creative ideas is getting closer. And the towns that don't tap into this synergy are at a competitive disadvantage." So it's really beneficial to the community as long as we're doing what makes sense to them and they are equal partners in the process. All right, so let me talk a little bit about true partnerships, what they look like. They must include equity and inclusion. Sometimes this involves reparations for past wrongs. So in the United States, what we've done in my county is we've given back 20,000 acres of land that white people stole from Native Americans. Around 1860 in my county, there was a massacre. 300 Native Americans were participating in a religious ceremony, and white people went over to, it's an island in our bay, and they killed them all. So that has been such a trauma for everyone in the community that starting in 2014, we started giving land back to the tribe. And so now we've given back almost the entire island. We've had to work on cleaning up the groundwater, the pollution that the white people have done. And so if we're really going to be serious about these partnerships, we have to have equity. We have to have inclusion, and sometimes we have to start with reparations. And reparations are painful for everyone because it means you have to admit what happened in history. And so I've worked closely with the Hoopa Valley tribe. I have a picture there of the Hoopa Valley, such a beautiful area. And the tribe has, one of the members of the tribe has received the first PhD in the tribe, and she has been hired at our university as a professor. So she's a dear friend of mine. And because we are close friends and she trusts me, she and I collaborated with another PhD psychologist from another local tribe, and he has a PhD in clinical psychology, so he's not a professor. But those two PhD members of the local tribe and I collaborated on a series of trainings on trauma-informed education. So they did the indigenous piece of how their dances and their religion and their local practices and culture can help address historic trauma. And then I did more of the scientific piece of neuroscience and medicine. And so we did a whole series over a 2-year period where we ended up training every single teacher, every single staff member, bus drivers, cafeteria workers, everybody in the entire tribe who worked with children in the education system. And so this has led to them reinventing their education system as a trauma-informed system, taking into account the ACEs, those adverse childhood experiences that the tribe has had for hundreds of years and continues to have high rates of poverty, suicide, and other stresses. So that's just one example of a true partnership that we've had. One of the things you could consider is profiling the community, their testimonials, what they say on your website, and using data to show the impact of your projects over time. Depending on what type of project, if you're involved in something like water or some sort of engineering products, you might need a more formal memorandum of understanding or a legal contract if this is going to be, something big. So one of our local tribes has fought for the removal of a dam that's affecting the quality of the salmon. And so the government has finally agreed to remove that dam. That involved a lot of legal contracts and things that are more formal. In my area in psychology, it's really just a handshake and, we're going to do this together out of respect. So that's an example that I've been doing with the Hoopa tribe for many years. And I wanted to share with you our website from my university, Humboldt State University. Every time we hold a public gathering, a lecture, an event of any kind, we start with a land acknowledgement. And it's really important because white people, colonial people around the world have taken land from indigenous people. So indigenous people would like us to give all the land back, and I don't see that happening. So it's important to at least acknowledge the land and do some reparations, as I mentioned. I don't think we're ever going to go back to where we were 200 years ago with Native people roaming the land like they used to, but we can do small steps. And so the first thing we did was we changed our mission statement to be a purpose statement, because the word mission in and of itself talks about genocide. The word mission is about turning indigenous people into Catholic, into Christian, into Western beliefs. When we missionized people, we made them cut their hair, lose their language, lose their culture. So we're trying to really use language that decolonizes our curriculum, our website, and our campus. And so this is our purpose, to provide the highest quality and affordable college education built on the contributions of diverse students, staff, and faculty who are committed to a just and sustainable world. And below you can see some of our vision, our values. And so we will partner with indigenous communities to address the legacy of colonialism and create a space nurturing of traditional ecological knowledge, pedagogies, and curricula responsive to their identified needs. So we have articulated these goals, and I'm not saying we're perfect. We have a long way to go. We still have a lot of problems, a lot of negative views from the community, but stating your intention is the first step, and we have done that. And the other thing that we have students do is, since 1987, students graduating from our university take a graduation pledge of social and environmental responsibility. So we started this, and now there are campuses all over the world that use this pledge. And so it's a personal vow to consider the social and environmental consequences of the decisions we make. And this is the graduation pledge that all of our students wear a ribbon at graduation that shows they have taken this vow. I pledge to explore and take into account the social and environmental consequences of any job I consider, and will try to improve these aspects of any organization for which I work. So it really boils down to a culture change and decolonizing your curriculum, decolonizing your research, decolonizing even your language. And we are in the process of that, and it's painful. People don't want to do it. People don't want to admit their privilege. People don't want to have anything to do with what they think they're being called racist. And so there's a lot of hard conversations that have been happening on our campus for the past 10 years. And I've been at the center of that, pushing and pushing and pushing us in this direction. But it isn't easy, but it's so necessary if we want to live in a sustainable world with sustainable population and sustainable practices. So I have a link here to a document cloud, and I thought this was a really great field guide. It's kind of like a step-by-step if you want to go on this journey. And I can provide that link in the chat. I'll try to copy it if I can, but now I'm going to open it up to questions and comments. I'm going to stop sharing and see if I can go grab that. I probably need to minimize this. Yeah, I can't figure it out right now because I'm under pressure with all these people watching me, but I'll give you the link later if you want the link to that field guide, which is, I think, pretty helpful. Thank you so much. What questions and comments do you have?
Natalie, Julio César.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tasha. We have some questions in Spanish, so we'll ask you to transfer to the English channel, please. Bueno, tenemos algunas preguntas en español que han formulado nuestros asistentes. Cristian Eduardo Cortés nos dice: muchas gracias, doctora Tasha, por compartir sus reflexiones. Para mí la investigación está necesariamente ligada a procesos de transferencia del conocimiento que permiten un impacto real en los territorios con las comunidades. Encuentro entonces que uno de los grandes retos que hay es descolonizar el saber y procurar evitar relaciones de poder entre la universidad y el territorio. ¿Podría compartirnos su reflexión en cómo lograr esto y el por qué es tan importante que el conocimiento trascienda las fronteras de los claustros universitarios?
Creo, bueno, este mensaje para Claudia, nuestra traductora. En las preguntas cuando responde Tasha, creo que lo mejor es que no lo hagamos simultáneo, sino que Tasha nos vaya respondiendo por partes y tú vas traduciendo por la que no se pise el audio traducción con Tasha. Para que por favor también le comentes a Tasha.
Okay. I tried to answer that for the past hour and 15 minutes. I'm not sure if there's anything more specific that I didn't answer that I could address or expand on. Is there something I didn't address that I could expand on? Yeah, that's what I thought the talk was about, but maybe I wasn't here. Okay.
So let's go to the next question. Ok, tenemos otra pregunta. Buenos días, estoy totalmente de acuerdo en la importancia de la relación de la investigación con la intervención social, lo que en nuestra universidad llamamos proyección social. Sin embargo, no siempre el trabajo es articulado al interior de, perdón, sin embargo, no siempre el trabajo articulado se facilita al interior de las universidades. ¿Qué puede recomendarnos para iniciar acciones que permita el trabajo conjunto, investigación e intervención? Entonces acá nos hablan más de la articulación al interior de la misma institución para poder lograr el desarrollo de esos proyectos de transferencia social.
I don't think I understand the question.
I think the question is related to
Natalie, de
what
pronto, si activas la traducción de español para que escuches cuando Claudia te habla en estos momentos de preguntas, por favor. Para que pongas también activo el canal de español en tu traducción.
Juan, Natalie, ¿ustedes me escuchan? Sí, ¿y están traduciendo lo que yo estoy diciendo en español? Sí, yo creo que la pregunta está relacionada no tanto con lo que un investigador debería hacer para acercarse a las comunidades y poder lograr formular y desarrollar proyectos que tengan impacto social, sino con lo que al interior de las instituciones y más allá de algunas de las recomendaciones que ya escuchamos en contextos un poco más administrativos, entre dependencias, en escenarios y oficinas de toma de decisiones, debería pasar para que se facilite la investigación con impacto social.
Well, I think first, the administration has to publicly state their opinions and their beliefs. Like I just showed you on our website, that website took hundreds of people collaborating on the language so that it reflected all of our values.
Vamos con la siguiente pregunta, Natalie.
And we often pushing from the bottom up because our administration is not on board a lot of times. And so we as faculty, staff, and students are often pushing them in the right direction. So we, for example, have said we want rules that every discipline has to try to decolonize their syllabus. And unfortunately, mostly white men do not want to be part of this transformation. And so you get women and people of color fighting against the establishment to be acknowledged. And so we finally have administrators who are willing to go out there to the public and say, we have these problems and we are going to address them. And so I'm sure you remember our previous president, Donald Trump. Our previous president, Donald Trump, said we are not allowed to teach about a history of racism. And if we do, we will not receive federal funding. And now you are seeing the fight all over the country that people who are usually privileged white people do not want us to teach critical race theory, and they don't even know what it is. So we are constantly fighting pressure from the top, pressure from the bottom. People are rioting and fighting for justice, and it's a never-ending struggle. So now Donald Trump's executive order is gone, so we can teach what we want, but we still have people within our campus who, for example, think I teach chemistry. Chemistry is an objective science. I don't need to know about any of these things. So we've spent the past 10 years trying to change the system, and it's finally making some headway. Sorry, I don't understand the question.
Vamos con la siguiente pregunta. Voy a leer una pregunta que nos dejó Alejandro Guerrero en el chat. Dice, en ocasiones se malentiende la intervención social como un proceso no riguroso, y esto lo puede desligar de los procesos de investigación. En sus intervenciones, en sus proyectos, doctora Howe, en la comunidad, ¿la rigurosidad del método científico está presente?
Yes, we use a combination of qualitative and quantitative data so that we can satisfy the program improvement as well as publish in peer-reviewed journals, satisfy funders. You have to live in two worlds when you do this.
Vamos, voy con la siguiente pregunta. ¿Alguien me puede avisar?
Sí.
Ok, en el chat tenemos un comentario y pregunta del profesor Jeffrey Ramírez. Dice, muchas gracias, doctora Tasha, por su presentación. El servicio social de la universidad ha sido y sigue siendo una necesidad de constante trabajo, pero sucede que a veces se hace tanto énfasis en la investigación con comunidades o investigación práctica que se desconoce la importancia de las disciplinas y carreras que son teóricas, investigación teórica. El profesor Jeffrey pertenece a nuestro programa de filosofía. ¿Qué nos podría decir sobre la investigación teórica en el marco de la temática de este encuentro? Transferencia de conocimiento con valor social.
Well, as I teach all of my students, you cannot have a project without a theoretical framework. But all theories must also be tested. So it's a constant cycle of theoretical improvement based on practice. I put the link to that field guide in the chat. I hope it works.
¿Puedo avanzar a la siguiente pregunta? Ok, tenemos un comentario.
Gracias, Jose Aldemar, por now.
Juan, Natalie, me indican si puedo continuar con las preguntas del chat.
Continúa, Julia.
Ok, tenemos un comentario de la profesora Juliana Liloy. Está escrito en inglés, así que intentaré leerlo así. Dice, in Colombia, higher education institutions must follow the government guidelines for the knowledge and technology transfer. Thus, transfer and social transfer of knowledge comprises a set of multiple actions for the development, use, modification, and dissemination of new technologies and innovations, which constitutes the framework to apply policies in order to contribute to innovation processes in which social impact is extremely important. In this sense, we consider that there is a difference between community-based research or social intervention based on action research and the concept of knowledge transfer with social perspective. I think what our researcher, Professor Liloy, wants to address is that there is a difference between the official guidelines in Colombia for knowledge transfer, which are more related to maybe engineering concepts, and some international and more accepted guidelines for community-based research or research with social impact. So maybe I would like to know if this difference is present in other contexts as maybe the US or Europe, or some context in which you, Professor Howe, has have some experience.
Do you want me to wait until you transfer that into Spanish? Okay. I understood it.
Sí, creo que ellos no te escuchan, Claudia, porque no tienen activado el canal de interpretación.
Okay. I don't think these two things are mutually exclusive. Every researcher works within constraints of their individual environment. So it doesn't matter what they are, you meet those constraints, but you also meet your own goals. As I mentioned, you have to live in two worlds to do community-based research. So I might be under the constraints of a granting agency that wants one thing and I want another thing. So in my project, I do both to make them happy and make me happy. So some universities in the US require you to publish in journals with a specific impact factor. And then you'll have to figure out how to collect data that will get into that type of a journal.
Ok, siguiente pregunta. Respetada doctora Tasha, muchas gracias por su intervención. Mi pregunta es la siguiente, de Menis Mercado. ¿Cómo traducir los resultados de investigación en el marco del objetivo misional de investigación? Claudia, ¿podrías ir traduciendo para no extendernos tanto en...
I would say the answer is the same. You collect many kinds of data, qualitative and quantitative, and you make sure your planning stage is detailed enough that you predict everything that might happen in the future.
Ok, la persona agrega, lo digo porque como profesores e investigadores en nuestros grupos de trabajo, grupos de investigación, existe un acervo de trabajos publicados, sin embargo, existen ciertas limitaciones para poder llevar a estos resultados a la intervención práctica en comunidades de interés.
Well, maybe you need to change the way you do your research. Maybe you should consult with those communities. So you have, it starts with the planning stage. If you remember the diagram, you have to plan from the beginning with the communities, what they want and what you want, and do both at the same time. So we need to stop the colonial mindset that I'm giving something to them, I'm doing something to them.
No tenemos más preguntas en el chat. Julio.
Estamos en el, cerraríamos el evento ya.
If there are no more questions, I think, yes, we do have one question.
Okay.
Okay. Yo lo voy leyendo y sí lo vamos traduciendo, por favor. Gracias, Claudia. Doctora Tasha, en la universidad que trabaja, cuando formulan sus proyectos de investigación, ¿el impacto social hace parte de los criterios de valoración del proyecto? Es decir, ¿el impacto social es determinante para aprobar o no un proyecto por parte de la universidad?
We have a different system where it's not our university's business what we do research on. So I don't know if the two systems are comparable, but in our promotion and retention system, we have awarded extra points for researchers who do meaningful research in the community. Our universities don't have to approve our projects. We have academic freedom. We are accountable to the funding agencies and to the criteria of promotion, but we don't need to get permission from our university to do research. If I'm writing a grant, for example, I have to get my dean's approval for the grant, but they'll just approve it if it sounds like a good idea. I mean, the administration doesn't get involved in our research like that. We work more with peer review, like we have research teams and people in our discipline. They're more the driving force for what we do, like people within our discipline, like other professors.
No tenemos más preguntas. Julio. ¿Preguntas adicionales? Ah, sí tenemos.
Nada más.
Sí.
¿La lees tú, Natalie?
Okay, I can read it in English. In the case of philosophical or theological matters, how do you put in perspective the concept of impact?
It's actually not a theoretical question, it's an empirical question. You cannot claim impact unless you do a randomized controlled trial. There's no way to determine causality without a randomized controlled trial. So the word impact is overused because we cannot claim impact or affected or caused because we're usually using correlational research designs. So you cannot determine causality from correlational research. That's a whole research methods lecture that I've done a few days ago, but I don't have time to go into it right now.
Okay, Juliana adds to her question and she says, but worldwide research discourse use it constantly. Why is that?
I don't know, they don't understand research methods. I mean, I could say that the Hoopa tribe feels my work has impacted them, but that's a testimonial, that's not evidence. So as I mentioned before, you have to design your program so that you have all different types of informants and all different types of data, because it's almost impossible to determine causality in social research.
So we have another comment. Muy enriquecedora la charla. Mil gracias por todos los aportes. Me gustaría consultar sobre estrategias para la consecución de datos. Colette, data. Ujú.
I think that you're the expert on Colombia. I'm an outsider, so I would have to leave that up to your expertise. I mean, I can certainly talk to you after this event privately, but you guys are experts on your culture. I'm not an expert on your systems or your culture. Well, you could collect it yourself. I mean, I don't know the constraints of your culture and if the data even exists. They might not even exist. If they do exist and they're not sharing it, I mean, you guys would be the experts on how to deal with that. But typically, when you want anything, you build coalitions and you don't do it by yourself. Everything I just talked about is about building coalitions. If 10 agencies want the data, it's going to be a lot of pressure on them to finally give it to you. You guys just got them to repeal a tax because you demanded it.
Okay, thank you, Tasha. We do not have more questions. So,
Okay.
Julio, do you want to close the event?
Okay, Dr. Howe, thank you very much for your presentation and recommendations. For an institution like Uniagustiniana in our nation, it is really important and enlightening to hear from someone with your experience. I think certainly what we learned today will help us move faster and safer on the path of knowledge transfer and research of social values. I also thank Rumbo and our International Relations Department and also our Entrepreneurship Department for organizing this event. And finally, I thank our researchers and administrative staff for connecting and actively participating today.
Thank you very much, Julio. I don't know if Juan Mauricio wants to invite our community to the other Rumbo events.
Gracias, gracias Natalie. Gracias Julio César. And thank you, Tasha. Bueno, pues ya estamos, ya con este cerramos este evento que teníamos hoy con Uniagustiniana. Y vamos a, Tasha me está preguntando en el chat. No, ok. Oh, ok. Entonces, pues ya cerrando este evento, los invitamos a conectarse a las demás actividades que nosotros vamos a tener durante estas 2 semanas que nos faltan de nuestra visita de la especialista de US Specialist Tasha Howe. Mañana los eventos, es que es el único día que no vamos a tener evento abierto, van a ser privados de una universidad. Todos los demás días tenemos eventos totalmente abiertos que ustedes pueden consultar en nuestra página web eventos.rumbo.edu.co. Vamos a seguir hablando sobre el eje central de este evento y esta visita, que es transferencia social. Y vamos a tener además un foro de cierre el 1 de julio, que es el evento que enmarca todo, pues que cierra y que lo hacemos con Fulbright. Y adicionalmente el viernes 2 de julio tendremos una segunda sesión de nuestro taller y de nuestro workshop que hicimos con semilleros de investigación, taller que fue un éxito, que empezó la semana pasada, el miércoles de la semana pasada. Recibimos bastantes pósters y entonces vamos a tener unas sesiones de cierre en la mañana del 2 de julio. Los invitamos a todos a seguir muy atentos nuestra agenda, nuestras redes sociales también, donde pueden saber y conectarse a todos los eventos. Y los invito una vez más a entrar a nuestra URL eventos.rumbo.edu.co. Muchas gracias a todos por acompañarnos. Muchas gracias a Uniagustiniana por el apoyo en la convocatoria y por ser nuestra anfitriona en este lunes y en este inicio de semana. Y muchas gracias a la doctora Tasha por su conferencia y por esta sesión de preguntas tan productiva con la que cerramos. Gracias.
Okay, thank you very much to everyone. We will remain in the room with Tasha. And Julio, you are also invited. Maybe Claudia, if you can stay for a few minutes. Thank you.
I'm confused. I have, there's something from 10